Hello, everyone in podcast land. Welcome to this week's episode. Today, we're talking about the Game Awards. Did one of us win a Steam Deck?
We talk about some Xbox news, including Microsoft raising the prices of games in 2023, as well as the FTC suing over the Activison purchase.
We talk about the Ida Neo 2, a handheld gaming console that is possibly better than a Steam Deck.
All right, so our first topic of the podcast. This past week, on Thursday, December 8th, we got the latest rendition of the Game Awards, one of the headline shows to go over some of the most popular games of the year and award some of the developers and creators that make them with some exposure, and also, give them a chance to have a speech. Some speeches very long, about how much they appreciate the awards and the communities and gaming in general. So it gives kind of a spotlight to the world of gaming. And then on the other side of that, we also get quite a few announcements and trailers. It changes from year to year. Some years, we get a lot of new news. Some years we get some really good game awards, some really unexpected winners. Like, for example, last year, Hazelight Studio and its head Joseph Ferris won Game of the Year with his game It Takes Two, which was an indie game developed by Hazelight Studios, and it kind of shocked the world by taking the Game Award that year. But this year was a little bit more conventional. We had some really big games released, and honestly, I thought this was one of the best Game Awards that we've seen in a long time. Despite the fact that it went way over time, I don't think there was ever a moment where, and I think I even mentioned this to you before the Game Awards, a lot of times the Game Awards can get kind of boring. And I don't think I was bored once during this episode, except for some speeches that I had to turn down the volume of for quite a bit. But other than that, I thought it was really good. And we got some really, really cool kind of award statistics here. So one of the big ones, God of War, one of the biggest games of the year, God of War Ragnarok, released by PlayStation Studios, took home the most awards with 6 in total, including Best Performance, Best Narrative, and Audio Design, Accessibility Options. And Best Action Adventure Game. They kind of just swept most of the categories in the Game Awards. Pretty much almost every category that it was nominated in, it won, except for a few. And a game that wasn't far behind it was Elden Ring, a game that released early this year and was compared a lot to games like Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Skyrim as being one of the best games of all time in terms of like open world games. And that actually went home with 4 awards, including the big one, Game of the Year. So that was kind of really, really cool to see. Some other awards that are kind of notable. Splatoon 3 got Best Multiplayer Game, and Kirby and the Forgotten Land got the Best Family Game. Those are 2 very, very good games. I played a bit of Splatoon 3 when they were doing like their open beta thing, and it's a fantastic game, super fun. And I've heard nothing but good things about Kirby. Apparently, it's like the best Kirby game ever made. And then also Mario plus Rabbids took home an award as well for Best Sim/Strategy Game. So Nintendo had quite a bit of an appearance at the Game Awards, which isn't normally the case. Nintendo's really kind of doesn't release a ton of games. Not to mention Bayonetta 3 also won for Best Action Game. So that was kind of cool. But then also, Best Mobile Game was Marvel Snap. This is kind of a brand new game that just came out. It's a card game based off the Marvel kind of universe, comics and cinematic universe, kind of everything intertwined. And it's a very popular game. And I believe it's even in IGN's Game of the Year running. So this is actually a pretty big deal for a mobile game to kind of get as much notoriety as it has. So yeah, it's kind of was a really, really cool Game Awards in terms of awards. There was a bunch of other awards there as well. But the biggest takeaways, God of War, 6 awards, Elden Ring, 4, including Game of the Year. Pretty close race altogether. And then in terms of announcements, I'm kind of really curious to hear if there was any announcements that stuck out for you. There was definitely a lot of announcements, more than we usually get, and very, very big announcements. I have some highlighted, but you know what? I'll probably go over some of those later. But I'm kind of really curious to hear what stood out for you in the Game Awards. Was there any game or games that you're really most anticipated for, or any awards that you were either really agreed with or kind of shocked you?
There's a few announcements that I'm pretty excited for. I I'm a pretty big Star Wars fan.
Mhm.
So they had Jedi Survivor, which has been announced for March 17th. I think we got, a trailer for it. I don't think it was full gameplay footage, right? But we got a trailer for that sequel. I really liked the original game, Jedi Fallen Order, so I'm looking forward to the sequel coming out March 17th. I'm definitely going to be picking that one up. I'm definitely going to be playing that one. Another award that Nintendo won, most anticipated game for Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom,
Mhm.
which is a sequel to Breath of the Wild. That one's coming out May 12th, which I'm also really looking forward to as well. Big Zelda fan also.
Yeah.
Um, Game of the Year, Elden Ring. I'm not surprised by that. I know right when it came out, people were saying it could possibly be the game of the year. So, I mean, am I more interested in playing it? Probably not anytime soon, but that's not a surprise. It's not like, a travesty of justice that how could this game win, right? It
Yeah.
makes sense. The God of War Ragnarok, I'm definitely interested in playing. I mean, before the Game Awards, I was interested in playing it. I'm still playing through the last God of War, which is the prequel to this one, I guess. That I'm enjoying that game a lot so far. So I'm definitely at some point gonna play Ragnarok. Does it win in so many awards mean that hey, I'm gonna probably pick it up quicker? Probably not. Not in a rush, but it's good to see that that franchise is doing well. I mean, last week we talked about how quickly it sold, and it was the fastest selling PlayStation first party title, in the history of PlayStation. So
Mhm.
not surprised that it's won so many awards. But another one that I'm interested in that I'm not gonna get, at least not right now, but I want to know your take on it. Cyberpunk 2077 is getting its first expansion. And I know you're a big Cyberpunk fan, since it came out, even when everyone hated it, you still love the game. And I know you're a pretty big fan of Cyberpunk 2077, but they're getting their first expansion, which is being called Phantom Liberty, and it's starring Idris Elba. So, original Cyberpunk, their big actor, their big feature was Keanu Reeves. Now their first expansion, Idris Elba in the Phantom Liberty. So I want to know, are you excited for this expansion? Are you planning to get it? Do you think the fact that, hey, it's not just, okay, this random story that they're adding on to it, do you think the fact that they're bringing a big name actor like Idris Elba in for it, do you think that is going to help sell this expansion or help get people interested? So what are your thoughts on, I guess, the Phantom Liberty expansion? And then what titles or announcements were you excited for also?
Yeah, yeah. So the Phantom Liberty expansion, definitely really excited for. The Idris Elba kind of announcement was kind of interesting and cool. It doesn't really change my excitement for the expansion that much. I will say, going into Cyberpunk 2077, I thought the whole Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand thing was a bit of a gimmick. And then I played the game, and honestly, I thought it was one of his best roles ever.
Wow.
He was just fantastic in it, and overall, the performances in Cyberpunk 2077 are amazing. I don't know of many games that can really compete with it in terms of performances, other than maybe some Sony first party games. But at the end of the day, what really kind of amazes me about Cyberpunk is the performances are amazing, but it's also a game that's designed around gameplay. It's an RPG. We've talked about it so many times. It's just a nerdy RPG. It's designed to be stat points this and all of that. So, you know, yeah, it's cool to see, and I'm not really surprised that, or at least I wouldn't be surprised if this is a larger expansion, just because CD Projekt Red in the past, with games like The Witcher 3, their expansions have been relatively large. But there's a couple of concerns I have with this announcement. One, the Idris Elba announcement can't be cheap. Him being in the game can't be cheap, which probably means this is going to be a pretty expensive expansion. And two, it also makes me a little bit worried for how long it might be, because all other expansions for this game have been canceled. Originally, there were supposed to be multiple, because of the reception of the game originally, they kind of scaled back. This is going to be the only expansion, and then they're going to move on to development of the second game, which concerns me a bit because I think a lot of the criticism of the first game, if they take that in and kind of change it towards the second game, I think this could be more of a situation where, with us, when we were playing the original Destiny, we really loved it, but then a bunch of people complained, and then they kind of changed the game, and it kind of wasn't really great for the people who loved it from day one. And I think that's
Mhm.
something that could potentially happen to Cyberpunk. But so those concerns aside, I still am really going to play this day one, which is rare for me. I almost never buy DLC. But yeah, I enjoyed this game so much. Definitely want to jump in. As for some other announcements that I thought were really, really cool, the first one, and it was actually the second announcement in the pre show, it's Returnal coming to PC. Returnal is a roguelike third person shooter made by Sony, actually made by the studio that made Resogun, by Housemarque. Returnal. It's an amazing looking game. I don't have a PS5, but it was one of the games close to the system's launch that I was super excited about. So that coming to PC is huge. That's one I'll definitely be interested in. Maybe might pick up one day if it goes on sale. The next one was Hades 2. So another rogue type of game. Hades, original Hades, I didn't play, but it is one of the apparently one of the best rogues ever, and it's always been on my short list to one day get a chance to play. And the fact that there's a full-on sequel coming out in the next couple years or so is huge. And yeah, that was a big announcement I don't think anyone really expected. And it kind of makes me want to go get Hades as soon as possible to kind of play that game. Although I'm not the biggest rogue kind of game player, so it's more out of the idea that this is one of the key examples of the best in the genre. That kind of makes me interested in maybe one day getting into. And then right after that, we got Judas, which is a game from a studio called Ghost Story Games. And this studio is headed up by Ken Levine. And Ken Levine was actually the head of Irrational Games. And Irrational Games was the studio that made the original Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite. And this game looks very, very Bioshock-esque. So this seems like a very real spiritual successor to Bioshock. And we could be even getting a Bioshock 4 someday coming from Take-Two. But yeah, this game was really cool. It's been hinted at for close to a decade now. And we finally got our first look at it. And it looks really, really cool. I can't wait for that. And then in terms of just big announcements that kind of just took the whole stadium by storm, or the whole audience by storm. One was Death Stranding 2, sequel to Hideo Kojima's PlayStation exclusive. That's coming. That was announced. Got some looks at that. Blue Protocol, which is an MMORPG coming from Amazon. It's being localized. I think that one's kind of interesting just because Amazon Games seems to be focusing on MMOs, which I don't know if is necessarily the smartest thing. Maybe they might want to diversify a little bit, but I thought that was interesting. They're localizing that game. For me, the biggest game of the show was a game called Banishers, which is a third-person kind of ghost hunting game, kind of set in like a medieval kind of fantasy setting. But it's coming from the studio of Don't Nod Entertainment, and Don't Nod is a studio that's worked on Life is Strange, created Life is Strange, but also before that they made Remember Me, which is one of my favorite games. An amazing world, an amazing story. They have been out of like the third person kind of game genre for a while, making narrative games, and this is their return. So seeing that was huge for me, and yeah, so that's on top of my list. And then the biggest one, one of the games to close out the show was Armored Core 6. This is coming from the creators of Elden Ring, and they're going to be making this mech game. If anyone doesn't know Armored Core is a classic PlayStation franchise. It's actually one of my brother's favorite games from when we were a kid. It's a game where you kind of customize a mech and go on missions, and you kind of have to customize your mech specifically for that mission. But based on how Elden Ring and Bloodborne and a lot of these games, these Souls-like games are made, I could very well see that maybe the formula for this game changes, and maybe it's just like an Elden Ring with mechs, which actually sounds really, really cool. But yeah, so this is the thing. I go back to saying this is one of the best game awards. Just so many games. Those are just like a few, but there was just, for everyone, there's probably a game for you that kind of spoke to you and said, oh, I can't wait to play that. And very few things were leaked or shown off beforehand. So yeah, it was just kind of a really awesome show overall.
And I guess one question that everyone in the audience is dying to ask: did you win a Steam Deck?
No, absolutely not. I did not win a Steam Deck. As a matter of fact, I feel like the Steam Deck giveaway kind of a notification at the bottom of the player broke very early on, and the player actually broke multiple times for me. So I could imagine they were probably struggling, but they did get a lot of viewers. I think at some time I was seeing like 300,000 to 400,000 people watching on Steam.
I saw 500,000 at one point.
Jeez, yeah. So the gimmick worked. Unfortunately, I didn't win one. Did you?
No, unfortunately, I did not win one either. No free Steam Deck. It didn't crash for me, although I saw on Twitter there was quite a few people where like you, this broadcast just failed to load,
Yeah.
or it crashed while it was playing,
Yep.
or there's so many errors kept on popping up for people, and it's pretty funny if they had this whole announcement, they had this whole, oh, we're giving away Steam Decks every minute, and the only way to watch or the only way to win a Steam Deck is you got to watch it on Steam, and like of course Steam stops working for people.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, unfortunately, no Steam Deck. But congratulations to everyone who did win a Steam Deck out there. You know, be cool to hear from some actual people who did win a Steam Deck. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you know how long the Game Awards ended up being, but pretty early on, the actor who won Best Actor for playing Kratos in God of War Ragnarok, his speech went on for at least like 10 to 15 minutes, and he just dragging on, and it's kind of like he's really pumping up these Steam Deck giveaway numbers because I don't know what kind of time they budgeted for him, but he definitely went completely over that. So I think he got some extra Steam Decks to people, which is, good for him if that's why he was doing it.
the the funny thing about that is even before him, Al Pacino seemed like he went on longer than he was supposed to too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like that whole first segment took up way longer than it really should have. Yeah, it was really awkward too. But yeah, definitely quite a few more people I imagine won Steam Decks, because I think the show was supposed to end at maybe around 10:30, maybe 11. But yeah, it went way past that.
I'd be interested to see how many Steam Decks they actually gave away to people
Yeah.
over that entire time frame.
One quick question I have for you, and I wonder if this is a bit of concern because we're going to talk about Microsoft a bit later. But Microsoft had almost no showing in terms of announcements or awards at this Game Awards. Do you think that's concerning in any way?
I don't necessarily think it's concerning. Maybe the fact that there's no show-ins, but no awards isn't necessarily that concerning.
Mm,
The reason I say that is because if you look at things like the Academy Awards, right? If you look at movies that, let's say, win Oscars, they aren't usually and aren't necessarily the most lucrative movies, or
yeah,
they don't necessarily have the biggest box offices, right? And case in point, I think of a franchise like Fast and Furious, which always comes out, has huge box offices, record-setting box offices, but they're never going to win an Oscar,
yeah,
but it's still a good movie. It's still a fun franchise that people will go to the theaters to see. I'll probably go and see Fast and Furious 10 whenever it comes out, but I'm not expecting it to win an Oscar, right? And if you look at some video games that way too, it's like, hey, we'll get into this later, but if say Call of Duty comes out and Microsoft happens to own Activision Blizzard, it's going to set a bunch of records. They're going to sell a lot of games and make a lot of money off of it, but it's not necessarily going to win an award because I mean, there's nothing revolutionary about the gameplay,
yeah,
right? And stories, they have decent stories, but there's, uh they don't have like a God of War Ragnarok type story, right? And that's the thing, especially if you look at games that they pump out every year, and something like Minecraft, right? It's been out forever,
yeah. Good point.
and it's still making money for them. It's still moving a lot of units, but it's been out for so long. So it's not like, okay, maybe it won an award when it first came out or the first 2 years, but at this point, it's not winning awards, but it's still selling well for them. So, I mean, the fact that there's no awards, who really cares about that? But maybe, okay, yeah, there's no announcements, there's no trailers, or maybe they're waiting for their own thing, their own, Microsoft event to say, hey, these are the games that we're working on, and the studios that we own, these are the games that they're working on too.
Yeah, yeah. Good point. And to your point, the Player's Voice Award went to Genshin Impact out of all games, which, a game I played quite a bit of, and it's a really good game, but very different from the rest of the awards that weren't voted on by fans. So yeah, yeah, I think you're right there.
Yeah. Another announcement that happened during the Game Awards, and this was kind of like a sponsored segment by Fortnite, Samsung, Ninja was involved. So you can now play Xbox Game Pass on any 2021 Samsung Smart TV and beyond. I know we talked about this months before this was announced, but it seems
Yeah.
like it's officially happening now. It's like live now. And they actually he Ninja was playing Fortnite on a Samsung TV, no console, no Xbox, no computer hooked up to it. He just had his Xbox controller Bluetooth connected to the TV and he was playing Fortnite on the TV. Now, Fortnite because he's Ninja, it's a popular game, that's what he's popular for. But the idea that any Samsung TV now is essentially an Xbox console in itself, I think that's pretty groundbreaking. And I know before we've talked about, okay, Xbox is moving away from consoles, they're just going to be a subscription service. But I think this is really the start of that, right?
Yeah.
The fact that on a Samsung TV, you essentially have an Xbox console, that's huge.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it was even at CES when they first announced, hey, it was coming to the 2022 TVs, and we talked about it. And then there was talks about, okay, we're going to try to bring this to 2021 TVs, and now that's happened. And I think even we mentioned back then, we hope this happens to more and more TVs. And it's funny, in the past little while, I've actually tried Game Pass a little bit, specifically with Fortnite, because it's free. You don't need a Game Pass subscription to play Fortnite on Game Pass. It's kind of a deal that they worked out. And I was having kind of issues with Windows on the Steam Deck, and playing Fortnite on the Steam Deck, as great as it was, it just didn't seem worth it to always have to boot into Windows just to play Fortnite. So I started trying Game Pass on the Steam Deck to do it. And it took a while for me to get things, the way I wanted it, making sure I'm connecting to the right network and stuff. But when things work, it is amazing. Like it's one of those things where you don't even really notice, especially on something that's a small screen like the Steam Deck. And I imagine for many people who you're not buying a TV for Game Pass, that's an added benefit. But to be able to just load up a game because your TV has it the same way you would load up a movie on Netflix, man, I could see that being such a great option for people. And I hope it comes to more and more TVs because, yeah, I'm definitely more of a believer now, pretty much using Game Pass almost daily to do dailies in Fortnite now than I was before. I definitely understand like where Microsoft is going, and they're proving it's still a beta. That's the funny thing. It's still a beta, but they're proving to a lot of people that, yeah, this is a really viable option.
Yeah. To segue from Microsoft and Xbox Game Pass, Microsoft recently announced that they'll be raising game prices in 2023. And also, the FTC wants to block, they have officially sued to block the Activision Blizzard acquisition. So, starting in 2023, Microsoft will be raising game prices of upcoming first party games from $60 to $70. And this matches the prices of their competitors like Sony, Ubisoft, Take Two. So, they're not the first person to do this, right? In their announcement, they also pointed out they wanted to wait until after the current holiday season, right? After this is happening in December, people are buying presents for Christmas gifts and that sort of thing. So they're making it clear that, yes, we know a lot of people are going to be buying games. We could have raised the prices right before Christmas, but we're going to wait till after Christmas so everyone can get their games for, Christmas and Boxing Day and whatnot. And they also mentioned that they're built for next gen games will be getting price raises. So I guess my question to you, we've talked about this in the past, but do you think this is good timing for them? Do you see it like, okay, yeah, you give them credit for doing it after Christmas as opposed to before Christmas when they know that everyone's going to be buying games? Do you think, do you give them credit for that? And then also with them mentioning the built for next gen games, do you think that 2023 is when we stop getting the cross platform games and when Xbox and Microsoft fully commit to releasing games for their next generation? I mean, it's their current generation now, but do you think they fully commit to these are games for Xbox Series S and Xbox Series X?
Yeah, for the second question, I think that might happen. I think the only reason that might happen is the original Xbox One is a very underpowered device compared to even the Xbox One S and the Xbox One X. They wanted to make that device really conservative so that they didn't run into the issues that they had with the Xbox 360. It was huge and kind of overbuilt and not very powerful. And I think the sooner they kind of phase that out, the easier it will be for a lot of their first party developers. So yeah, I could see them doing that. In terms of the timing of the price increase, I don't think there's ever really a good time to increase a price, but I definitely think companies like Sony and Meta should take this as an example of how to do things that is unfortunate and no consumer really wants it to happen, but do it the right way. Microsoft came out very early. Well, I shouldn't say very early. They came out a few months ago saying, hey, we aren't going to be able to maintain prices for forever. They didn't say exactly what they were going to raise prices on, but they said we're going to eventually raise prices. But we're going to keep things the same for the holiday season. Then when they finally do announce, okay, we're going to raise the price of games, they doubled down on that. They said, hey, we're not going to raise prices this holiday season. And I think that would have been an awesome move for something like Sony and even Meta to do, to say, hey, you know what, in 2023, we're going to raise the price of the Meta Quest 2 and, the PlayStation 5. And the fact that they didn't, I think, was a key sign that they wanted to make that extra cash this holiday season. I think it's just a good marketing move for Microsoft to be like, hey, no, we know that this is a tough time for people, and we know that you want to be able to pick stuff up. And honestly, it's not even that big of a difference in terms of the $60 to $70 game difference, especially because games are going to be on sale for Black Friday and stuff like that, and going into the holiday season. So I don't even know if it's going to impact people as much, but just the marketing of it, of saying, no, we actually understand what's going on, and we're going to try to make this as easy of a transition as possible, I think is a huge win for them. But yeah, overall, it's still a little bit of a downside that they're going to be raising prices. And I think this is going to coincide with the fact that Game Pass is probably going to go up in price in 2023 as well, probably relatively soon. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see prices increase for the Xbox consoles, specifically outside of the United States, similar to what Sony has done. Because if anyone isn't aware, Sony did raise their prices, but in the United States, they stayed consistent. And I think this has a lot to do with the fluctuation of dollars around the world compared to the US dollar. Something like the Canadian dollar, which hasn't changed much, but is still undervalued compared to the American dollar, and also changes to the pound and the euro. I think Microsoft is going to have to stabilize those prices a bit, raise the prices to kind of coincide with that. So yeah, I do think in a lot of markets we will see everything rise for Xbox, other than just games. But they're starting with games for now. So yeah, it's a weird situation, but nonetheless, I think it's something that the entire industry is doing, and Microsoft is already losing a lot of money on these consoles sold. It doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do a redesign anytime soon to make that money back. So yeah, they're just going to have to raise prices across the board, which
Yeah.
kind of sucks for them, honestly. I think it's going to make it tough for them to. They've done a good job with filling in the gap by being cheaper and being more competitive. I think it's going to be tough for them to maintain that value narrative if things like Game Pass go up in price, kind of like what happened to Netflix when they started to shrink. Do you think that if Game Pass and these games and the consoles start to go up in price, that maybe they lose that competitive nature that they're having with Sony right now? Maybe they start to fall behind a little bit more?
I think for the time being, Game Pass is still gives them the competitive advantage
Mm,
until the Game Pass price rises. But I think especially now, so more than ever,
mhm,
right? We see, okay, prices for Xbox games are going up, but right now Game Pass is staying the same price. So Game Pass looks like that much more of a better deal. I still don't understand how, the game studios that they own and how everyone is still going to remain successful and lucrative with Game Pass, functioning the way it does. But that's a problem for them, not a problem for us consumers,
yeah.
right? So I think right now, prices going up, Game Pass staying the same. This looks great for Game Pass. And as we just mentioned, you can play Game Pass on Samsung TVs now. You don't even need to buy an Xbox console. So it's even better for Game Pass right now. I don't really see that being a problem until, I don't know, they would have to at least like double the price of Game Pass, I would say. Because if you think of how many games are going to be coming out, and if you can play them day and date on Game Pass, it's a no-brainer,
Mhm.
especially if you don't need a console to play. So I'm not too worried about Xbox, Microsoft losing market share because of this price raise. I think if anything, it just forces people towards Xbox Game Pass more. But yeah, it is unfortunate. It's definitely unfortunate. And as you said, we saw this come in. They said that they would have to do this eventually. So it's not a complete surprise. It's not like out of left field, like when Meta raised the price of the Quest 2. But it is unfortunate that it is happening now.
Yeah. And, I think this coincides with I guess just the frustration that Microsoft is having right now because the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, said Thursday that they're going to sue to block Microsoft's $69 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard. This was voted on like a 3-1 where they issued a complaint at the purchase and at Microsoft. And I think this comes down to some changes that's happening with the U.S. government where they want to be a little bit more proactive and active on potential antitrust and monopolistic kind of purchases than they have been in the past. And the interesting thing here is, I think we talked about this in either the last podcast or the podcast before. It's kind of a situation where, I was saying I could see this deal not going through, especially coming hot off the heels of the Bethesda ZeniMax deal. So the interesting thing with that is that the FTC actually mentioned that one of the reasons why they think that this purchase could suppress competitors to the Xbox brand, including like their subscription model, is because when they spoke to the EU about the Bethesda deal, they mentioned that they would not make those games exclusive, but they actually did. Games like Starfield are going to be exclusive. Redfall also going to be exclusive. And there is the kind of narrative that Bethesda, ZeniMax, id Software, all these kind of games that the studios that they now own are potentially going to be making exclusive games for the Xbox, including potentially even this upcoming Indiana Jones game that's being made. So yeah, I think this is kind of a sign that maybe they do not trust Microsoft by saying, hey, we agreed with Nintendo that we'll have Call of Duty on their console for 10 years. We would also do a similar deal with PlayStation, which is something that they've been talking about. But yeah, it's kind of a situation where now there's official lawsuit from the FTC to block this deal. EU regulators are taking it to the next stage to also block this deal. Microsoft has announced that they're going to fight this, and they do think that everything they are doing is legal, and they want to prove it in court. So they are going to kind of battle back this block to make this deal go through. But I gotta be honest, it seems like it's winding down to potentially this deal not happening, and likely this deal not happening. But I'm curious, do you agree with what the FTC is saying? Like, do you think companies like Nintendo, like Sony, like whatever company might, if Sega decides to get back in the console market, which they never will, but let's say they did, they should be concerned about this potential purchase of Activision Blizzard and all of these games becoming exclusive? Or do you think Microsoft, knows that they need to keep these games multi-platform, kind of like they did with Minecraft?
I think that they know they need to keep them multi-platform, especially if you look at, Xbox Game Pass and us saying that that's going to be the main focus of Microsoft moving forward,
Yeah.
right? If at some point they're not even going to be making console games, or sorry, if at some point they're not even going to be making consoles themselves, they need a platform to sell it on. And yes, okay, they're going to have Game Pass and they're going to be on TVs and phones and all this stuff. But if you could still sell a game for $70 on a console, that's so much more lucrative for that game and for that game developer
Mhm.
than being on a streaming platform, right? So I think what they said, they're gonna at least do 10 more years of PlayStation Call of Duty games, for instance.
Yeah.
I think if at 10 years, if they don't come out with their own Xbox console, why would they stop selling games to PlayStation users?
Hmm.
Right? Like if we look back at how well the recent Call of Duty just did, right? $800 million in 3 days. I don't know what percentage of that was PlayStation consoles, but I would say at least a third, a third if you look at its numbers between PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. So why would you give up that many hundreds of millions of dollars when you don't need to, right? When you're still going to have PlayStation users that want to play your Call of Duty games, right? And if you're not offering a console for them to move over to, then why would you do that?
Hmm.
So I think like you said, like with Minecraft, they understand they have to keep these games multi-platform to be the most lucrative they can. Then yeah, I'm not really worried about it. I'm not really worried about them making all of these games Xbox exclusives. And I think also recently they said that they want to start bringing Call of Duty to the Nintendo Switch also,
Yeah.
which completely goes opposite of, okay, yeah, they're going to make these. Xbox exclusive games if, okay, yeah, we're at least 10 years on PlayStation and we're going to bring Call of Duty to the Nintendo Switch, which it isn't right now.
Hmm.
I don't know how many Switch users want to play Call of Duty on their Switch, but the fact that they're even talking about that, it really doesn't seem like they are trying to remove Call of Duty or other franchises from PlayStations, from other consoles. And I think also right now, the FTC isn't seeking a preliminary injunction to stop the deal from closing, which means the deal can still close. They're not saying, okay, you have to put a halt to any negotiation. So Microsoft and Activision Blizzard can still close a deal, but it's just maybe after they close it, the FTC can go back and say, okay, no, yep, we decided this wasn't a legal deal, or yeah, you're not allowed to do this. This is too much of a competitive advantage to the other console makers and the other companies out there, which is interesting that they didn't go for the preliminary injunction. But I'm not worried about it becoming about them removing the bigger franchises. I mean, maybe some of the more niche games that Activision Blizzard makes, maybe they'll make them Xbox exclusives or Xbox Game Pass exclusives. But in 10 years time, or however long, the time frame is, I could see them at some point coming out with a Game Pass app for PlayStation then.
Yeah.
I would see that making a lot more sense, right? If at some point they make them Xbox exclusives and then they release a Game Pass or something like it for PlayStation or for these other consoles, that's the route I see this going. If they ever do make it exclusive, I don't see it actually become an exclusive to the point where you can't play Activision Blizzard games on a PlayStation, on a Nintendo Switch. I just see it as I just see it as a way to get Game Pass on other consoles.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that Sony is the most afraid of, because I think that could be, we talked about like the Trojan horse kind of mentality that Xbox seems to want to kind of use with Game Pass to get Game Pass on as many products as they can. Samsung TVs, PlayStations, maybe even the Switch. Maybe that's how you play Call of Duty. You play it through Game Pass. The Switch already has cloud-based games like the Resident Evil games you can play via the cloud on the Switch. Maybe Microsoft wants to do the same thing there. But I think that's the interesting thing. I think what Sony specifically is really afraid of is how Netflix got its rise to prominence, right? They licensed media from everywhere, including Disney and Marvel, TV stations and stuff like that. And then all these companies realized, wait a minute, we could make so much money if we just made our own streaming service, as opposed to just selling it to Netflix. And that's what Disney did. They pulled all their stuff off Netflix and made Disney Plus, and they're making way more money off of that than they are just giving their products to Netflix. And I think that's what Sony is learning from. They're like, well, we don't want to make Game Pass better. We want to be bigger than Game Pass. We want our subscription service to be where people go. And if they have something like Call of Duty, which is the biggest game in the world, it's going to be almost impossible for us to compete. So we want this deal to be blocked. And I think that's what FTC regulators are saying, specifically the growing games subscription business, right? So they want to make sure that this deal doesn't give Microsoft a huge monopoly on the subscription-based kind of services where no one else can really compete. Do I think that would happen either way? I honestly don't think so. We've both mentioned on this podcast and in podcasts in the past, I could definitely see Microsoft going away from the console model eventually, maybe not by next generation, but by the next few. But the interesting thing is that 10-year deal, Sony specifically said, hey, that's when we plan on having next gen consoles. And that could really shift from people buying a PlayStation 6 to people buying an Xbox, whatever dumb name they decide to call it, because they're the only ones that have Call of Duty. And I think, yeah, that's one thing. And then there's also the fact that, if they aren't the only ones that have Call of Duty, but Call of Duty is on Game Pass, games are going up to $70. Maybe they go up to $80 by that point. And it just makes so much more financial sense to have the subscription service. So I'm going to buy the Xbox because I can get Call of Duty on Game Pass as opposed to paying $80 or $70 or however much it costs on a PlayStation. So yeah, it definitely gives them a lot of leverage. But I have said in the past, I think this is leverage that, maybe not this specific leverage, but Microsoft does need leverage. I think they are struggling right now. This goes back to the earlier Game Awards conversation. Nothing announced, no awards. Sony, even though they weren't in the audience, was represented multiple times, including winning the most awards for something like God of War. I definitely think that Microsoft can and Xbox can land themselves in some trouble if games don't start coming out. But at the same time, it's kind of like a catch-22, because there's also the fact that Activision Blizzard has a lot of issues. Even very recently, there's talking about issues with the development of Diablo 4, and things have not really gotten much better. Or even if they have, they're still not at the level that they should be at Activision Blizzard. And Microsoft was supposed to come in and help fix that. And the one thing that Microsoft has been very transparent about is that if a game is not ready, we're going to just delay it. Halo was delayed. Starfield was delayed. They have really no games coming out this year. And you're not hearing as much about crunch in Xbox as you're hearing about Activision Blizzard. So maybe you need a company like Xbox to be like, okay, we're not going to pull a Elon and make our employees be hardcore. We're just going to give them the best kind of working environment that we can because we can afford to. And that's something that clearly Activision Blizzard has been struggling with. So yeah, this is kind of like a weird mess of a situation of like, what is the actual result going to be? But like you said, this isn't specifically blocking the deal. This is just a suit to see if they can block the deal. So hopefully we kind of get some information relatively quickly on like how this is actually going to play out.
Yeah. Our final topic of the day is the Ion Neo 2, a handheld gaming PC that could be better than the Steam Deck. Recently, it's been making the rounds. I guess the Ion Neo 2 is officially out. We've gotten the Ion Neo Air in the past, but this new device features things like an AMD Ryzen 7 6800U processor, which makes it a lot more powerful than the Steam Deck. The screen apparently has a better color accuracy. It's also a 7-inch display, but it has no bezels and a 1920 by 1200 resolution. It's supposed to have the same great vibration motor as the Nintendo Switch, which everyone raves about. It uses these special HAL magnetic sensors for their joysticks and their triggers, which means no joystick drift. And it's supposed to have smaller dead zones. The company actually says they have 0 dead zones in their controllers. Their joysticks also feature cool RGB lighting. It has other cool features like the power button has a fingerprint sensor. There's 2 USB-C ports on the top, and there's a third one on the bottom. The device features USB 4.0. You can also connect an external GPU if you want more power from this game in handheld. And the flagship version has 32 gigabytes of RAM. There's a lot of talk about this device. There's a lot of talk about how powerful it is and how much more capable it is than the Steam Deck. Now, as someone who owns a Steam Deck, what have you heard of the Ion Neo 2, and are you at all interested in possibly trying it out and possibly switching, returning your Steam Deck and getting an Ion Neo 2?
Yeah, no. So the Ion Neo 2 has been around for a bit. I think they first started getting out to some reviewers about a month or so ago, soon after the Ion Neo Air. And I remember at the time I was watching there's actually 2 devices. There's the Ion Neo 2 and the Ion Neo Geek, which is just kind of like a lower end version of the Ion Neo 2. And I remember when they were originally announcing these products, there was a lot of excitement because these were going to be the first ones to use the Ryzen 6800U processor. But since these have come out, there have been some mini PCs that have used the 6800U as their main processor. So we got some testing on the performance of this beforehand, and now this is going to be the first mass market kind of handheld to have this processor in it. So the interesting thing is with the Steam Deck and the 6800U processor are actually very similar. The biggest difference is going to be in the GPU performance and the wattage that the Ion Neo 2 can use. So specifically with the GPUs, they're both using the RDNA 2 kind of architecture. The Steam Deck has 8 compute units, which is like how many like cores or units that specific GPU on that processor has. Because remember, it's an all integrated chip with the CPU and the GPU. And the Ion Neo 2 has 12. So the interesting thing about that is the Steam Deck processor is a custom made APU. So it's something that Valve and AMD work together with to make something very specific for the Steam Deck. And that's important for a couple of reasons. I believe on this podcast I mentioned in the past that because it's a custom part, certain programs like DaVinci Resolve doesn't really know what it is. So it can kind of struggle with that. But the 6800U is the mass market part. So it's not customized. It's just the any CPU that you would get from AMD, but specifically a mobile version of it. And why that's interesting is for a couple of reasons. And it's one of the reasons why I think the Aya Neo 2 information out there is kind of difficult to parse, but there's a very real reality that the Steam Deck processor is far more efficient than the 6800U because it was designed that way. And that's really important for something like a handheld. So this 6800U can, I believe, even at times get up to 33 watts, which is huge for a handheld, and you can really boost performance. I believe I specifically kind of focuses on the 28 watt kind of TDP, so that's how much power can get pumped into the processor, and that increases how much performance you can get. The interesting thing is, yes, you can use all that power, but on a chip like this, you're not mostly going to see much of a benefit, especially in a handheld kind of form factor. So, for example, let's say you're playing a game like Cyberpunk 2077. These are just made up numbers. These aren't exact numbers. There's plenty of really great reviews out there that you can see exact numbers for. But let's say you go up to 28 watts or even 33 watts to play a game like that, and you can get 50 frames per second, right? There's really not much of a benefit to that because that's still under 60 frames a second, and your battery life is going to be less than an hour. Whereas something like the Steam Deck, which focuses at around 15 watts, you can get maybe 30 to 40 frames per second and play for an hour and a half. And that's specifically what the Steam Deck is designed for. It can definitely use more power if they wanted to. They could even potentially put out an update in the future to have it use more power. But it's specifically designed to be as efficient as possible. And I think there's some really great reviews out there where they show the performance delta as you start to raise the performance of the chip or the wattage of the chip, and it just doesn't work out to a point where it makes much sense. So that's the interesting thing about that. But then there's also the fact that the pro and con of the Aya Neo 2 is that it runs Windows. And that's a really cool feature because all games are going to work on it. You don't really need the Proton translation layer. But the downside to that is that Windows wasn't designed to work like a console, right? So things like sleeping the console isn't going to be great. It's going to drain a lot of battery because Windows doesn't work well for that. And then all of the customization features that you have on something like the Steam Deck that's built into the OS isn't there on the Aya Neo. Now they have built a bunch of stuff around it that is really cool. And one thing I will say that you mentioned there, I think is huge with this device, is the screen. Much better screen quality. People have actually compared it to the OLED of some of the competitor devices. Or OLED screens on competitor devices. And yeah, it's really, really good screen. And it's 1200p, 1920 by 1200 for the full-fledged version. And that's big because the Steam Deck has a 720p screen, and that's really all you need. But the good thing about this is only a 7-inch screen, like you mentioned. And lowering the resolution on a screen that small, you're not going to see that much artifacting or issues displaying a 720p image on that screen because it's so small. The pixels are smaller, so you're not going to really see a lot of those issues. And then also, you can take advantage of the extra power increase when you dock it. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of really, really cool things about this Aya Neo 2. And the fact that there's a new competitor for the Steam Deck and the Switch coming out like every other day. Things like the AYN Odin or the Retroid Pockets and like all these emulation slash PC gaming, the Ambernic Win 600, so many of these devices. But yeah, I don't think there's really any company that has made the balance of price and performance and efficiency as the Steam Deck. I don't think the Aya Neo is there, but they do bring a lot of really cool things to the table, like the Hall sensing joysticks, which you can actually put in your Steam Deck. They sell them directly for the Steam Deck from GuliKit. And the screen options, the design, the smaller design, I think these are a lot of things that the industry can take as a whole to kind of say, hey, we can make a better handheld. But yeah, it's just a weird one. It's also really expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still a really interesting device. I really like the design. But I'm curious, how do you feel about the Aya Neo, especially like with the design and the ergonomics? We both talked about how like, yeah, the Steam Deck feels great, but it's not really, it's too big for a lot of people. Do you think that maybe something like the Aya Neo Air and the Aya Neo 2 is going in the right direction in terms of size?
Yes, I do. Also, price wise, Steam Deck starts at $399. Aya Neo 2 starts at $850. So quite a big price delta. In terms of form factor, I definitely like the form factor better of the Aya Neo 2. But as you said, when you talk about, okay, the build quality and the form factor and the power of the device compared to the price of the device, do I necessarily want to spend 2 times the price for a smaller form factor and a bit more power? Probably not. So I think form factor wise, yes, I like the Neo 2 better, but everything else wise, price wise, the Steam Deck I would say is much better in terms of like bang for your buck in terms of what you get. But like you said, this if you look at the Switch was the first real handheld gaming console where people were like, "Oh wow, like everyone loves this. This everyone could get on board with this."
Yeah.
And because of the Steam Deck form factor, that we started seeing more emulators that mimicked the form factor of the Nintendo Switch. And then we got something like the Steam Deck being mass produced, and then we get Neo devices. And so I think that the fact that there is the Neo 2 and the Neo Air and the Geek and those, and Steam that can see like, all right, maybe people really like this smaller form factor. So how can we offer the same things but in a smaller package? And it doesn't need to be the same size, but even maybe they say, hey, for the Steam Deck 2, maybe we make it a little bit smaller,
Mhm.
a little bit more compact, because that is one complaint that they've gotten from quite a few sources from quite a few people. That's definitely one area of customer feedback. My question to you, what would you want to see from a Steam Deck 2 in terms of improvements over the first one? And if there was one feature from the Neo 2 that you could take to the Steam Deck 2, what would it be?
Yeah, so there's definitely tons of features, specifically not just from the Ion Neo 2, but even from things like the Switch and all of the insane amount of devices that are out there right now. The obvious one for me is more than one USB-C port. I think that's something that maybe a lot of people wouldn't gather at first or right away. But the Ion Neo 2, uh, it's designed with you got two USB-C ports at the front, at the top, and then another USB-C port at the bottom. Is huge. I think that's a big difference in terms of connecting devices. One, but two, docking. Uh, there's just something really cool about the Switch of just dropping it in the dock and then everything kind of showing up. Yes, you can dock the Steam Deck by plugging in the cord and stuff like that, but it just doesn't feel the same. I don't know what it is. It's just like not the same. And then on top of that, there's the cool thing about, okay, with the Ion Neo 2, you can dock it in a charger or something like that, and you still have two ports at the top to use. So yeah, I definitely think that's a huge get for the Steam Deck 2, and I think that's something they should focus on making sure that there's more I/O on the device. And then the things like the magnetic joysticks, so you don't have to worry about drift. I think that's a cool idea. I don't want. I like the option right now with the Steam Deck that you can add that in after the fact because it's designed to be repairable. And I like that simply because you want to keep the price down. The better display, I know that's a huge complaint for a lot of people, and that's not a complaint specifically from me, but I have seen a lot of people in the Steam Deck community say, hey, we want a much better screen. That will increase the price, but maybe on the higher end version, like the $650 version, instead of just getting the etched glass, the non-reflective screen, maybe you get a completely different screen altogether, like
Mhm.
Ion Neo is doing with the Geek and the Ion Neo 2. I think that would be a good idea as well. So yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of things that the Steam Deck and the Switch, especially the Switch, should be taking from these devices of when they release their next consoles. Because yeah, there's a lot to learn from these guys. Do you have like one feature either from the Switch or the Ion Neo 2 or the Steam Deck, one in particular that you think every console or most consoles that are handheld should have going forward?
I would say the docking thing,
Mm,
like you. That's one of my favorite features about the Switch is how simple the dock setup is.
yeah.
The fact that you just drop it in place and then everything works. Now, yeah, okay, the Steam Deck, you put it on and then it's just one cable to connect it and it's one connection and everything works, which is great. But the Switch is just so much, I don't know, it's so much more seamless.
Yeah.
And yes, okay, along with the docking station, if there were still IO ports that you could connect to on the Steam Deck, that would be great. But I think just, overall the docking procedure setup, if that was cleaner and whether that was simpler or you still had IO, just docking in general, I think is the number one thing that they could improve or one easy thing I guess that they could improve. Now, in terms of joystick drift, I think that would be something that everyone should focus on.
Yeah.
In terms, I haven't used the Hall magnetic sensors. I don't know how much they affect controller drift. I personally don't have that big of a problem with controller drift. Maybe, I don't know, I just have enough controllers that I rotate through, so my controllers don't get worn out as much. Maybe I'm just not as big of a gamer as some other people. Maybe, I just haven't put enough hours in to get the controller drift. But in terms of, okay, this is a way that we can make all controllers, all joysticks last longer. I think that would be something also that would be pretty great for all competitors, whether it's a handheld gaming console or even if it's just a regular console like a PlayStation or an Xbox.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's definitely an issue, especially on the Switch with its low profile sticks that are more susceptible to something like drift. And I think that's something the Switch should do. I don't think that's something the Steam Deck necessarily needs to do for the next iteration, but I definitely think that's something the Switch needs to do because it's been such a huge problem and because those Joy-Cons are insanely expensive. There should be no excuse for there to be poor quality control on Switch's joysticks. And to kind of reverse that in a bit, the one feature that I wish these companies would take from the Steam Deck, and I think Steam Deck should really double down on because I think they do a good job but don't go far enough, is repairability. And I don't think the Switch, Nintendo will ever take repairability like that, but I hope they do because the cool thing with the Steam Deck is the reason why I'm not worried about joystick drift is you literally just undo a bunch of screws and you can pop out the joysticks and pop two new ones in very, very easily. And they show you how to do it. They sell you the parts. It's not hard. It's a 5-minute change. And yeah, I wish they would go even further. Like right now they're gluing down the battery. I hope that they use some iPhone level pulls to get rid of the battery so that you're not damaging the battery or potentially puncturing the battery or bending the battery to get rid of it. And even easier screen replacements, I think, would be huge if there was a way to kind of like what the new iPhones do, where it's a sandwich design, so you can replace the screen without having to go all the way through the device, maybe in a future version. So yeah, those are things I definitely would love to see the Switch and iNeo and all these devices to take more of a initiative with repairability. And I think that might be one of the reasons why the Steam Deck is so big, to make it easy to repair. And I hope, as much as I do want a smaller one, I wouldn't sacrifice repairability for a smaller size. At least not at this point.
Yeah. And also if you look at how many inputs it has, right?
Yeah.
Like it has the bumpers on the back, it has 2 on each side. And then it also has the same, okay, it has analog sticks, it has buttons, but then it also has the thumb pads on either side too.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like if you have though like that much input on the controllers, like at some point you have to make them bigger to fit the inputs themselves and the components for those inputs.
That's a good point.
So yeah, if it's okay, we make the Steam Deck bigger, but we give you less inputs, or we make it less repairable, then yeah, I don't know if that's a good enough trade for that. Any closing statements for today?
No, it's just honestly kind of interested to see what 2023 looks like in terms of gaming. As cool as this Game Awards was, the one thing that it did show me is that 2023 is going to be a huge year with games. Yeah. And I'm kind of really excited about it. Unfortunately, everything's going to be more expensive, but it's still going to be fun to see all these games coming out and who's going to win Game of the Year next year. It's going to be a much tougher battle, even though this year was pretty tough too.
No, it's going to be Legend of Zelda.
I forgot about that. That's coming out next year too. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Legend of Zelda for sure. Take it easy, everyone in podcast land.
Catch you in the next episode.